Thanks, Jeff. We have a panel discussion now, so if I could get Bill Hawkins back along with Michelle McMurray-Heath. I think I saw Michelle. There she is. Come on up. So, and I think everybody knows who you are here, but I'll pass those down. Great. Well, while Michelle is coming up, I will introduce Michelle as well. So, Michelle is one of the key architects in the beginning of MDIC as well. At that period of time, she was working for FDA, CDRH. In the last year, she's moved to industry and is now the Global Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Medical Devices at Johnson & Johnson. But the reason she's up here is because, as I said, she was one of the key architects in the early days of MDIC. So you're here. There's obviously a lot of other people that were involved in the creation and formation of MDIC, and a lot of work that went into getting us to where we are today. Almost 3 years from the beginning of creation of the organization. I joined just about 2 years ago, but there was a lot of work to get to that point to actually have the capability to bring in somebody to lead the organization. So Jeff, Michelle, and Bill were very much involved in that. So while we're getting settled in here on the panel, I did have a question for Michelle, since you didn't have speaking comments. Michelle, as one of the leaders here, I'd be interested in your thoughts now that you have a unique perspective of being originally on the FDA side, and now you've moved to the industry side, and be interested in your thoughts or how they may have changed as you've changed in your role and perspective.
Well, I think the most amazing thing about MDIC is how much it predicted what the future really held, that we needed a safe space for industry members and regulators to come together and think creatively about problems that face both sides. And I see that even more clearly now sitting on the industry side, because we're bumping up against some of the same questions and quandaries that the agency faces every day. And we're all looking for a solution that doesn't take a huge diversion of resources, because everyone is resource-strapped. The industry is resource-strapped. Our healthcare system is resource-strapped. But a place where we can pool our resources to try to tackle some of those key issues. I think one of the most surprising moments in the year since I left the agency was a day that I got a call from pharma saying, can you tell me more about that MDIC model? We really want something like that in the pharmaceutical space. And I just kind of had a chuckle, because we'd actually based the MDIC structure on the Biomarkers Consortium at NIH, which had been formed to try to tackle some of these regulatory science questions for the pharmaceutical industry. But it just goes to show that even though MDIC is kind of the new kid on the block, it's actually leapfrogged over some of those more established efforts, because it's been so creative about the types of questions it tackles, the members it brings together, and then the solutions it really achieves. So I just say bravo to so many members of the team that have really built this incredible organization.
Thank you, Michelle. Jeff, you said during your remarks, and I thought it was notable, good science will get you to market. And when you talk about good science, could you maybe describe a little bit more when you say good science? Regulatory science obviously is the area that MDIC is thinking about, but when you're saying we're looking for good science, what are you really saying?
Well, science is always tailored to the question that you're going to answer, but in setting up to answer that question, you want to make sure that you have sufficient confidence in the results that you get. And you don't want to start with saying, here's how much money I have, what am I going to get for that money? It's how do I really need to answer the question, and then to figure out how I'm going to get there with what I've got.
Okay, thank you. And then, Bill, I know you talked quite a bit about experiences in the broader ecosystem, and how, if you will, these are big challenges, and we need to bring all of the stakeholders together. You've worked in a variety of organizations. You've been in diagnostics and therapeutics, big organizations, small organizations. How do you see MDIC and the role differing, if it does differ between those organizations, or do you see the applicability throughout the ecosystem? You know, we talk about industry, but obviously industry is a very broad area. So how do you see that?
Well, I think the principles of what we're doing for MDIC cuts across, you know, all of those different, if you will, sectors, from diagnostics to devices, you know, to kind of therapeutics. So I think I don't see anything different there in terms of the size and scale of the companies. I mean, clearly, you know, we're very fortunate that the Medtronics, the J&Js, the Abbotts, and a lot of the other companies that are on the roster, you know, have seen the value of MDIC and have supported, you know, our mission here, which, you know, really provides, you know, I think, support to the whole industry. And I think the small companies will benefit from the science, you know, that we're collaborating on, the tools that we're developing, and the ability to hopefully, even with the work we're doing on clinical trials, to make it, you know, more predictable and to get new products into the marketplace. So I think that the principles clearly apply to, you know, all verticals and it's really agnostic to scale.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? There's one up front here.
Jeff, how do you respond to the things that people are beginning to say that computational modeling is the third science after observation and experimentation? We're now looking at computational modeling as being able to reveal and do experiments that can't be observed. What's it going to take, or is that realistic? And where do we have the philosophical discussions that don't happen anymore that would explore the foundation of that kind of science?
Well, computational modeling does provide very exciting opportunities. It isn't the answer to everything, but I think behind it is the good data in setting up the model. So if you're going to set up the model, you need the data behind it to develop the model, and then good validation and qualification. I think where a lot of times things fall short is on the validation and the qualification side, knowing that, in fact, that model is going to predict what it's intended to predict. And for us, when I say qualification, it is with sufficient confidence that we can rely on it for the kind of regulatory decision we make. And I'll add, we have put out a draft framework writ broad for what we call medical device development tools, these regulatory science tools, including computer modeling, to sort of think about what are the considerations in that qualification. And it's critical to say, what am I going to use that model for? Because that will indicate what kind of evidence we need behind it to have confidence we can rely on it.
Other question, Ray?
So regulatory science can be expensive. And like Jeff said, the FDA and MDIC is putting their money where their mouth is. But as Michelle pointed out, everybody's strapped for resources. And I'm wondering if you can give us some more specific information about the scale of the financial resources that you have to bear on this to bring to this issue, and also how those resources are going to be matched to the various challenges that are sitting within this relatively large space of needs.
Well, I may let Bill talk about in terms of the organization. I can say for CDRH, it's like anything else. We'll do the best that we can. Do we have the level of resources that we'd like to have to engage in regulatory science as we should, which I think would have huge return on the investment? We're not even close. And when I say resources, I don't mean necessarily resources sitting at CDRH. I mean resources to invest in a public-private partnership like MDIC.
Can I just add before we talk about specifics that, you know, I think as an industry we often go a little woe is me. We are a poor industry relative to pharmaceutical industry, and therefore maybe we shouldn't try. But the impact that MDIC has been able to have with a relatively modest investment speaks to the fact that if we pool what resources we do have, we can really change the face and the direction of regulators around the world. I was just sitting down with the head of PMDA last week, and he was talking about patient preference. This is an issue that's been driven by MDIC and is now on the global stage. So we need to think about not what we don't have, but what we do have, and how when we come together it can have an outsized impact.
And I would just add one aspect here in terms of how we decide what we work on. As a member organization, our members have a voice in defining our priorities, and it's the collective wisdom of the membership and the emphasis and identification of the high-impact areas. So the list will always be long, and then what we do is we identify the areas, and example, patient preferences come up a number of times, but there was a wonderful convergence from all of the stakeholders within this Venn diagram that said this is an area where there is a big need. We use the term white space, and nobody is doing this, and so this is an opportunity to have an impact, a measurable impact in a line of sight period of time. And so without a lot of monies, but with a focused group and committed group from all members of the ecosystem, we were able to make, I think, significant impact.
So I would just, I don't know if the question was maybe more specific to the cost of some of these projects, but I think you'll see, we've been very, I think, so far good at being able to leverage a lot of resources from beyond just the dollars that we've been able to attract from industry. But look around the room, all the people that are here, I mean, these people in many respects, have dedicated time either from their companies to really help to work with MDIC. We've got these 5 different projects, and some of the things that we're trying to do, I mean, they do require resources. And so this is one of, the challenges that we have to be able to, bring in the funding, in addition to what we generate, for the sponsorship, but bring in specific funding for some of the projects, like we did with the patient-centered project, where we had the grant actually, from the government, and likewise, what we're doing that in the case for quality, we've been able to get an outside grant. But this is something that we're going to, we need, to attract funding to be able to really do the kind of job that we want to do. But a large part of what we have, the value has come through kind of in-kind work from people that are working with companies and helping MDIC.
So I want to take us to a little bit of a different place. I'm hiding over here. And that is, the work is really good, and we're going to hear more about the outcome from specific projects. My question is actually for both Jeff and Michelle, and that is, okay, now we've got some tools. What should companies do in a very pragmatic way when they want to use those tools with the review staff? Rob talked a little bit about the fact that the staff is a little isolated on purpose to make sure that they're keeping their eye on the appropriate levels of safety and efficacy, and we need to approach the issues in a very clear way with good data. How should companies, the member companies, bring their use of these tools to FDA? What's the best way to do that? Is there a group, Jeff, and your staff to talk to? I mean, how should this really become something very pragmatic and very practical and useful for the member companies?
So that is a great question. And particularly if we're dealing with a tool that maybe we haven't used before. If we've used it before and we've already said this is qualified, go forward and multiply, that's easy. What happens if it's new? Well, you've hit upon the challenge that we have faced, which is we do not have the bandwidth to engage in the qualification of a whole host of new tools. And MDIC, and you're going to hear about this a little bit more today about some of the thinking on where we could go, is MDIC may also serve in a way to help facilitate maybe independent assessments of tools, and starting with some of these models that are being developed, so that there is a judgment along a framework that we are working to develop to see if, in fact, there is that sufficient evidence behind it that we can rely on it. That would create huge efficiencies for CDRH, and I think could expand the universe of such tools that we would be able to rely on. But regardless, if a company is interested in using a tool, the answer is easy. Come talk to us.
Susan, you know this from working on both sides of the issue as well. One of the challenges we have internally is letting people know that FDA is open to these types of approaches, even though those of us in the room have heard it face-to-face. Our C-suite also wants to have some reassurance as well before they invest in doing a new patient preference study or using a new computer model. So often it's pointing to specific examples, like, for example, the obesity device that was approved this spring using patient preference data is a very concrete example that we can use among our executives when we're saying this is the type of study you probably want to invest in. So I'd say to the center, continue to publicize how you use these new tools, because that helps us internally. And then the other thing Erin Murray and I have done within J&J is to host kind of a series of conversations around some of these tools so that we raise awareness. The computer modeling group has spurred an annual symposium within Johnson & Johnson of people across the company interested in computer modeling. So taking MDIC as the first step and then going within your companies and trying to build awareness in that next level down, I think, is the important step to getting these really fully adopted.
Yes.
So I know that MDIC is currently focused in the pre-market space, but given the iterative nature of medical products and devices, I was wondering what future efforts you might have in looking at post-market evidence generation to support your regulatory science work.
Anybody want to take that?
Well, you're singing my song. So I think Dr. Califf, in his remark, he talked about the importance of a national evaluation system and our ability to leverage evidence from clinical experience, really the data that's generated every single day as a part of routine care. And this is another priority area for CDRH. We put out a strategy on this in 2012. We've had 2 multi-stakeholder groups, of which there are even some people in the room who participated in, making recommendations to us on setting up that kind of a system. And I'll speak personally for CDRH, not a member of the board for MDIC, but I think moving into this space with the national evaluation system and our use of evidence from clinical experience would be a game changer. What does that look like for the world? We talked about products going on the market, the benefit and risk, and what we know. We always have uncertainty when that product goes to market. How much uncertainty you can accept depends upon also what's the likelihood of our resolving that uncertainty when the product goes to market. Today, that's hard to do because once a product's on the market, it's very challenging to recruit people to participate in clinical studies. But on a national evaluation system with established infrastructure, you can gather the information you may need. What does it mean? The opportunities for product to go to market, we may be able to accept greater uncertainty. That's probably the biggest game changer that we have on the table right now. And that would achieve that objective of products going to market, but very quickly we're having the high confidence that there's reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. I'd love to see us go there.
One of the most challenging set of products to bring to market now are combination products. How do you see combination products fitting into MDIC purviews? I know MDIC itself is a partnership that's done some really innovative things and has been one of the most successful partnerships, has been referenced, but do you see yourself partnering with others so we can get to these knotty questions of how to get combination products that cross more than one FDA center to market faster?
Well, I don't think that, I think when we formed MDIC, again, with the limited resources, we tried to step back and look at sort of the first set of kind of priorities, and that led to the projects that you'll hear more about this afternoon in terms of clinical trials and computer modeling and simulation. But, I think that's it's something as a board, if there's specific areas, that really fit the mission of what we're trying to do that address combination products, I don't think there's anything that would prevent us from doing that. But it's just really a matter of, again, the capabilities and just you have to prioritize. So hopefully with our success going forward, we'll be able to take on more projects, and perhaps, that will be one of the areas that we can address.
I would just add, go ahead, Michelle, please.
I was just going to say one of the beauties of MDIC is that it stayed clear of the kind of legislative and policy debates that some of the other organizations already had well covered. And up till now, I think combination products has rested in that space. We're supportive of a legislative proposal around combination products that's currently pending in the Congress. But I think there are some regulatory science issues around combination products. What's the delta of evidence you really need to show between two established technologies, a device technology and a drug technology, to really show that there's some additive value or at least no additive risk to putting those two together? And that's an area that I think is ripe for an organization like MDIC to tackle, and maybe we can start boiling it down to the regulatory science issues that underpin the political discussion that's so far taken place.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Michelle said, the beauty of our construct is we are bringing the thought leaders together, and so if as this area becomes there's more clarity in terms of the regulatory science needs, and that means not a particular product or particular technology, but a broader regulatory science need. The beauty of our partnership is it's expandable to support based on member engagement. And so if there is aligned engagement, and I keep using the patient preference, but if you got all three of those ecosystem stakeholders saying, this is important to us, we want to work on it, we're willing to put our best minds and resources to that, then I think it's very much within the purview of what we could envision in the future, but obviously we're not doing anything there at the moment. Question in the back.
That was sort of in line with the question I was going to ask, and I wasn't sure if this was the right panel to ask this question, but I wanted to in light of a couple things that were pointed out today. So our company is concerned both with devices and pharmaceuticals. Michelle mentioned that MDIC is sort of pharmaceuticals, and Bill's slide showed that the issues are probably even more challenging for the pharmaceutical companies in terms of costs. And my question was, has there been any discussion of a parallel initiative in the pharma area or expanding the scope of MDIC in future?
Well, I can speak to the fact that we're not looking to expand into the pharma area per se. As I think Michelle mentioned, there's been a lot of inquiries as relates to some of our work and how to leverage that and take it and run with it for pharma applications. Similarly, Dr. Califf mentioned CTTI, and we stay connected with them, and much of their work has been it's broad for all medical products, has an opportunity for us to take and leverage for medical device-specific tailoring. So we're staying connected there, but I wouldn't want to suggest our mission is going to expand to be in the pharmaceutical area at this point in time.
One of the difficulties of combining issues in the pharmaceutical space with issues in the device space is that our industry is just so much smaller than the pharmaceutical industry. So usually when you have both stakes around the table, the pharma voice can easily swamp the device voice. And that, I think, is part of the power of MDIC and why so many people have been drawn to it, because this is the one organization that's uniquely focused on the scientific needs of the device industry. That being said, I think there are areas where we do bridge interest, and maybe that's a ripe area for collaboration. And I think imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So I think I hear Bill saying they invite more imitators around. So I think there's opportunities.
I have a question for the panel here. Dr. Califf said, a member from the audience asked about public-private partnerships and success, and he indicated there's many examples where public-private partnerships have not been successful, and I think we're off to a good start. But I just maybe going down the panel get your perspectives on what, from your perspective, do we need to make sure we continue to do or change to, and this is a personal survivability question, to see MDIC sustain itself going forward? So, Bill, I'll start with you and maybe just go down.
We have to have the right leadership.
Yeah.
So,
hey, good answer.
Yeah, well, but that's, I mean, in all seriousness, I mean, when you look at what we're trying to do, and I think it starts with making sure we really define the right projects and recognize that we can't do everything. And so if we start with at least, as we have, 3 or 4 or 5 projects, I mean, I think the experience that we've learned from the past 3 years is that, one, we do need to be first very clear about what we're trying to achieve. We have to have a very clear sort of vision for that particular project. We have to have very clear deliverables. And then we have to have the right sort of leadership for that particular project. And whether it's a project manager or whether it's a sponsor, but it's very clear that we need to have and it's not necessarily someone in all cases that is the expert, but it's someone really who's got very good project management, or leadership skills to be able to ensure that when we say this is what we want to do, then we're able to marshal the resources to get it done. Because, again, in many cases, the things that, the way we get things done, we don't have dedicated teams. We don't have, 30 people that are working full-time for us. And we may have a project manager. In fact, if you look at MDIC today, we have really 4 full-time employees. So we'll have maybe a project manager, and then we really have a kind of cross-functional team from, again, FDA and industry and other stakeholders. And we're trying to leverage, their time, recognizing that they're working on other things, but to help us in this particular thing. So that takes a pretty skilled leader to be able to have a lot of influence with not necessarily all of the authority or responsibility.
Jeff, anything to add there?
Yeah, well, first I agree with Bill. And I'll just sort of flesh out, one is that the things that we work on, there's good return on the investment. People have to feel that this was worth doing. And we engage in deliverables. Some of these deliverables have to have early wins, and we've tried to pick, sort of a suite of things where there are returns on investment at different stages of time. Inclusiveness is important. On the one hand, we've got membership that comes in, and people, decide that they want to be a member of MDIC. At the same time, many of the products being developed, it's important then get them out there either for public input or in other times make sure bringing people even outside of MDIC into the discussions. I think Case for Quality is a nice example where that is happening. And then I think the piece in terms of work where we still need help, though, is engagement, people participating. As was pointed out, our ecosystem maybe has less dollars than the pharmaceutical industry, but we do have a lot of people, we have a lot of smart people, we have a lot of good data and information. And it doesn't necessarily take always a lot of money. It does take time and effort. And that is a personal commitment on our part. And if I had sort of a request is we need people to participate. I go to my staff who want to engage and say, yes, you may, and not only may you, it's really important that you do. Love to see that. Some organizations are doing that. I'd love to see more do that. And if so, we can get a lot of value without a lot of cost.
I would agree with what's been said. I was thinking this morning, too, that the medical device industry and the regulatory affairs world, those are both very relation-based worlds. Jeff and I were within FDA telling folks within the agency that MDIC was a good idea, but it was really Dale Wahlstrom who was putting his good name behind going around to company saying, trust this. This is a good idea. Let's get together. Let's bridge our divides to try to work as a team. And I think continuing to foster that relationship-based trust is where the real value behind MDIC lies, and I think we're off to a good start, and we just need to continue to build that in. And I think it's going to be tested over the next couple of years. As we go into as we already have gone into user fee debates, MDIC will probably get pulled into more political back and forth. So staying above that fray and saying, we are really talking about the science, how we evaluate these technologies, that's going to be the virtuous middle, I think, for MDIC to stay in. And I think all the pieces are there to both maintain that great camaraderie and also maintain those high standards and values. But just staying that course, I think, is going to be critical.
And I should mention, Michelle mentioned Dale Wahlstrom. He was the fourth pillar in really getting MDIC off the ground. Dale is the retired CEO of Life Science Alley and a longtime executive within the industry, and really, I think, was the catalyst in taking the vision that we described and making it a reality. So, and Dale is in the audience today, so thank you, Dale, for your help. There's a question over here, Stephanie.
Thank you. This is a question for Michelle, and maybe MDIC as well, or others could have input. But I wondered if you could talk about how manufacturers could learn more on the regulatory science front that will help on access as well. I think you've done so much amazing work in your time at FDA bringing patient voice in, and we're really a pioneer on that. But what patients really are worried about today isn't just if they have access to products, but also it's not just if products are approved, but if they have access. So maybe to the point of there's a lot of data, there's a lot of information, but how will it actually impact how people can get access? That would be great to hear more about.
Well, I think one of the important kind of unsung threads of MDIC is weaving in patient representation from the very beginning. I see Diane Dorman in the back, and NORD was a very critical early partner in MDIC. There have been patient voices around the table from the beginning, and I think that's been very, very key to not just making sure that patients are informed of the activities, but are there at the outset shaping the projects. So they help shape the patient-centered benefit risk project. They have influenced the clinical trials project. So all of these pieces mean that the patient voice is very, very critical for every step of the process. I know there have been detractors recently saying that patients have not been inclusive in this process. But I think in the medical device space, there is a spectrum of folks that are interested in the products. There are patients who are eagerly, hungrily waiting for the innovations and want to do everything possible to invest their time and their energy into trying to make sure that innovation pathway is as streamlined as possible, with assurance that at the end of the pipeline are safe and effective technologies. And then there are those that are more concerned with the adverse events, which of course we all are, but who focus more on that than the promise of the technology. And I think it all goes back to that benefit-risk balance. We need to realize that every medical intervention, no matter what it's based in, even traditional Chinese medicine, for example, has an element of risk. But it also has a promise to reset biology. And it's that promise and that hope that draw people into becoming healthcare practitioners and that help our patients through the course of the day. So we need to remember that patients are very key. In Johnson & Johnson, we're actually just starting to recruit our first ever Chief Patient Engagement Officer, and I think this is going to be a benchmark for the industry to say how can we weave patients into the development process from an earlier point in the process.
Yeah, I would just make one additional comment, if I understood your question, as it relates to access, going beyond when the product may be approved, but clearly one of the biggest challenges our industry faces today is payment and reimbursement, and is something we have discussed, at MDIC. I mean, it's not something that we're focused on today, but clearly it's something that we are very cognizant that it's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest now, barrier, to getting products to become standard of care. It's just the available reimbursement and funding for it. And so it bridges into what we're doing, because in many respects a lot of the clinical trial design needs to recognize that it's not just about clinical effectiveness, but it's about cost effectiveness and value. And so this is something that we realize that we need to we're going to need to get more involved in going forward.
And that is why, when we constructed the MDIC board, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services was a very important member of that initial formation to make sure that that payment piece and the proof and evidence needed for payers to have confidence in technology was also included in the conversations.
We have time for one or two more questions. If there's any questions from the audience. Very good. Well, I think we're, thank you again to the panel for, I think, a very robust session, and thank you to Bill and Jeff for your opening remarks. We are now at a break, and we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but not much, so we'll come back and start the next session at 11 o'clock. Thank you.